The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren hosting the show, and my co-host over on the other side of the country, Mr. David Martino.
Hey Al, how you doing?
I am delicious.
You are.
Tasty today, real tasty, wet and syrupy. Another beautiful day. So now what we've got a classic. We've got a man that's written, or he's got a book out, and it's going to be covering his Complete Leonard and Larry Collection. So this is a strip, Gay Comix strip from a few years back, and it's kind of a collection all put in a book. So let's welcome him here. It's Mr. Tim Barela. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
As a comic strip person, when did you start writing and doing comic strips? Like, where did that come from for you?
Oh God, I talk about it in the introduction. It's something that I always wanted to do. I always wanted to draw cartoons and write stories and whatnot. And it was a long process of trying to get my foot in the door somewhere in the business after high school, and in the 1970s, and eventually I kept coming up with these two characters, Leonard and Larry, and they just seemed to click. There was just something about them. I thought, well, maybe I could develop a comic strip around these two guys. They were sort of the gay neighbors, kind of a radical notion for the funny pages in the newspaper, because that's what I was aiming for. I was always submitting stuff to the newspaper syndicates back in those days and getting lots of rejections, and these characters kept showing up in my ensemble of the neighbors who lived next door, and I thought, well, I could develop a strip around them, and then the opportunity came to submit some sample cartoons to a little publication called Gay Comix up in San Francisco, and that's where it all started. That was in the early 80s.
How was the mainstream, or let's say the commercial world, with dealing with your strips? Leonard and Larry and things like that, a gay comic strip, and giving a voice to LGBTQ people. Like, what was that like in society in general?
Well, I remember one time, because my comic strips, my cartoon characters and stories were aimed at a particular audience in particular publications. But as far as the greater populace out there, they really didn't see my stuff. But I can relate a story about the time that at the big Comic-Con down in San Diego, I was involved with that for years. I was moderating a panel, and suddenly I had Lynn Johnston, who does, for better or for worse, in the newspaper. She was sitting next to me, and it was an interesting experience, because there were all these other cartoonists, and they were jealous of me because they talked about having these little tiny strips in the newspaper that people could barely read, and I had a full page in a tabloid-sized magazine. And so I was talking about, my cartoons, and it was interesting in that Lynn Johnston plans her stories way ahead of time. And she started talking because I was talking about gay issues. She started talking about how she was planning to have her the next door neighbor's kid in her comic strip come out of the closet. And this was something that she was planning ahead of time. And this was the first time anybody had ever heard of any of this. She just blurted it out, as far as I know. Her editor from her syndicate was sitting right in the front row down below us. He was the same guy who was the editor for Doonesbury. And, you know, he probably didn't hear anything about it until then. So the interesting thing is the reaction that she got when she finally pulled off this storyline. I mean, she got newspapers canceling her comic strip. She got hate mail. It was terrible back then. But thankfully now things are different. You know, people's attitudes have changed.
What did you sort of have in mind when you do a comic strip like this with gay characters? Like, kind of what was your general storyline about? Was it just about issues, or was it more comedy and less serious?
Well, what I wanted to do at the time, being that I wanted to get my foot in the door, I wanted to do something that nobody else was doing, to find a niche for myself that nobody else had filled. There were a lot of, as far as the different gay cartoons that were published in Gay Comix back then, there were a lot of issue cartoons. There was a lot of coming out stories. There was stuff like that. And my notion was, what if these two characters, they're already out of the closet. Their families already know about them. They're just living a normal life. And, you know, how does living a normal life, is it different for gay people? How do issues come up, and how do they deal with them, and so on and so forth. And of course, I you know, approached it in sort of a sitcom-y way. I've always been accused of doing a very light sitcom sort of cartoon style that I do as far as my writing goes and all. But that's how I dealt with it. You know, it was just trying to find something that nobody else was doing. And nobody was doing a gay comic strip about families. Larry in the strip was married. He was in a heterosexual relationship previous to meeting Leonard, and he had 2 kids. And so the kids became main characters also. And then the kids had kids. And Larry became a grandfather. I don't think anybody who was drawing gay cartoons back then had one of their characters becoming a grandfather. So, you know, it was just a lot of fodder for my imagination and storytelling. And, you know, it was more interesting than just doing issues. The issues came up occasionally, but, you know, I dealt with them in my own way.
Now, it doesn't look like you met immediate success trying to sell Leonard and Larry. Was it a struggle to get the strip published?
No, not really. It was a struggle to get any kind of cartoon sold back then, you know, sending things to syndicates and whatnot. But I think that when I sent the samples of Leonard and Larry cartoons, which are the first little cartoons that appear in the collection, when I sent them off to Gay Comix, it was immediate acceptance, and, you know, they wanted to publish them. But as far as other things, yeah, no, it was always a struggle trying to send things to newspaper syndicates. I met somebody who worked years later at the Comic-Con. I met somebody who had worked at the Los Angeles Times Syndicate, and he told me that he used to see my stuff coming in, and he said, I always liked your stuff. Nobody else did. So anyway, but I never had any luck with that anyway. Just as well, because I'd probably be, the newspapers are unfortunately going the way of the dodo, and so are the funny pages. So I'd probably be doing something completely different today.
So when you were doing these, did you have kind of a thing that you wanted people to get out of the comic strips? Was there kind of a purpose to it?
I think the main purpose was just making people laugh and making them think. When I wanted to deal with an issue, there wasn't any particular agenda that I had going into it. I just started thinking about, what would be an interesting, funny situation. And if there was something political that was going on that I wanted to talk about, I'd find a way to work it into the storyline. I wish that I would have been doing the comic strip back when Proposition 8 was an issue here in California, or when Brokeback Mountain didn't win Best Picture for the Academy Award. I wish I could have talked about that, because the strip was very LA based. It was about people who lived in LA. Leonard's brother was a television producer and writer, and so I talked about show business and Hollywood a lot. But I wish I would have had those opportunities, but unfortunately the strip ended a few years before that controversy came up.
So your main characters, Leonard and Larry, where did they come from for you? Like, did you find them from people you kind of knew, or were they someone you've seen somewhere, or how do you assemble your characters like that?
They're just figments of my imagination. They really, very few of my characters are actually based on actual people. They just, I don't know. They just pop into my head. When I'm thinking of, stories that I'd like to tell, I just create these characters. And, wouldn't it be interesting to throw in this little quirk in their personality and whatnot, and an ethnic background or something like that, and I just sort of make them up out of whole cloth.
How long would it take you to write one of these strips in general?
The Leonard and Larry strips, once I started doing stuff for a magazine called The Advocate, and then after The Advocate, Leonard and Larry went to another magazine called Frontiers. They were both tabloid-sized publications, and I had a full page. And I had a deadline every 2 weeks for each of those magazines. Gay Comix, prior to that, was whenever I came up with something, I would just send it to them, they'd stick it in the next issue. But once I started working for the magazines, and prior to that, I had experience doing cartoons for motorcycle magazines in the 1970s. And so I knew what it was like to work under a deadline. And so for Leonard and Larry, I had a deadline every 2 weeks. Never missed a deadline in 12 years doing stuff for Frontiers magazine. Every 2 weeks, another strip.
When you look back at all this stuff, are you pretty happy with how it turned out?
Oh, I guess. it just turned out, I just, make it all up as it went along. And yeah, there are some storylines that I'm very happy about, because there were a lot of characters in Leonard and Larry. But not just Leonard and Larry; they were their kids, they were their friends, and friends, relatives, and different situations. I would come up with ideas for different situations and different characters, and sometimes for a handful of strips, like 4, 5, 6 strips in a row, wouldn't have anything to do about Leonard and Larry at all. It would have to do with one of the other characters, or Larry's employee, or their friends, or something like that. And I delve into all the things in their lives, and it made it more interesting for me. At least I wasn't wanting for ideas for jokes and storylines and whatnot.
Now, it seems like you've aged your characters throughout the strips, and that seems, very different from, most cartoons. I was just wondering, why you decided to age your characters.
To be different. I just never liked the idea of these cartoons that, I saw as an adult, and I remember seeing as a little kid looking at the funny pages, and the characters never aged. They were always, Dennis the Menace was always a little kid.
Yep.
They never change. And the fact that my characters aged made the storylines more interesting. There were things that I could talk about Larry being paranoid about growing older, and he was about to turn 50 when the strip ended. But I used to like to deal with things like that, about how time passed and how things changed in people's lives. It wasn't just this static situation with lots of gags. And I was very proud of the fact that I was one of only 3 comic strips in the country that had their characters had their characters aging in real time. It was me. Wow. It was Lynn Johnston, who did For Better or For Worse, and Gasoline Alley. And that was it. Just the 3 of us.
I would think it takes a lot of talent, to be able to sit there and draw the characters and do the whole strip and come up with the theme and stuff. Where did you get the confidence for that? Or did you take any art classes, or has it just come natural?
I guess it just comes natural. It's just what I do. It's just, I tell stories, and I tell stories with pictures, and it's something that I always used to play around with as a little kid, and growing into adulthood. It's just something I always wanted to do, and something that I was good at, better than most of the other things that I can do. So it just came naturally, I guess.
Do you have is there other comic strip writers or producers that you sort of looked up to, or that were your favorite?
Oh, I guess there was quite a few of them. I particularly remember a cartoonist named Dave Berg, I think his name was, in Mad Magazine. He did very sort of realistic, real human-looking characters that were cartoony at the same time. And I think that that's where I got the greatest influence as to how to design my characters. People have always pointed that out, that my cartoon characters don't look like cartoon characters. They look like real people, but in a cartoony way. And I think that Dave Berg had a great influence on me. I used to love to read his stuff in Mad Magazine whenever I'd pick it up as a kid. Other cartoonists, Gary Trudeau, whose name I couldn't pronounce earlier. Gary Trudeau and Doonesbury were a great influence as far as, topics and dealing with, anyway, I just like his stuff. And let's see, it's been such a long time since I really followed any of the newspaper comic strips. Calvin and Hobbes. God, that man's a genius, absolute genius. And his artwork is superb. You know, when you look at it and you look at the line work and you think, he does this with a brush. The man draws with a brush. He doesn't use a pen. It's just amazing stuff. Let's see, who else was a big influence on me? I'm trying to remember. There was a cartoonist in Playboy magazine who did these really weird, creepy. What was his name? Oh, now I brought him up and I can't remember his name. But he did these quirky things. Sort of these macabre little cartoons, and they were just so wonderful. And once I start thinking about it, I can probably think of tons of different cartoonists like Edward Gorey or what's his name, who did The Far Side? I'm not good.
Oh, I was just going to say, how about The Far Side?
Yeah, I'm not good with names. If you can remember his name, I'd appreciate it. I am not good with names.
What do you think of the business now? You know, so many newspapers are kind of going under, or they go online and all that. Do you think that the comic strip business is going to kind of fade away, or do you think it's still going to be strong?
I think that people will still do stuff online. That's something that I never wanted to do. That's why when the strip was canceled back in 2002, why it's taken 20 years for it to sort of come back in a compilation. I just never wanted to do anything online. I didn't want to run my own website or anything like that. But a lot of people out there do, and there are a lot of online cartoons, good, bad, and indifferent, and some of them are exceptionally good. And that's what people do now, and how they can manage to run these websites and self-publish collections. Just dealing with my publisher at Rattling Good Yarns Press over this past summer and trying to put this book together, how do people do it? It was just insanity trying to put this book together. And it's completely different now. Everything's print on demand, and of course my publisher can contact me through emails and texts, and it was pretty, for the most part, in the old days when we put books together, it was kind of hands off. I had a book designer in Illinois, and my publisher at Dreamhaven Books at Colliard Press. My old publisher, he's in Minneapolis, still in Minneapolis. And, I dealt with them. I give them phone calls, and they'd call me, and it was pretty hands-off. They just, put things together. But now, oh my God, my publisher now, for putting this compilation together, he was calling me every day for a couple of weeks. I mean, oh, there's Ian again.
Yeah.
Don't answer. Oh, what does he want now? You know, but Ian did a good job. The book turned out really, really nice, and I'm very happy. I'm very happy with it.
Do you think underground comics paved the way for changes in mainstream comics, movies, and TV today?
Probably. It had a lot to do with it. Certainly, Gay Comix, where Leonard and Larry was first published, that was sort of an underground comic book. And I think that the underground stuff had a lot of influence, yeah.
So you never thought you'd go further and write a book or anything like that?
It's sitting in front of me. I'm sitting at my workspace. Oh, Ian knows about it. Ian knows that I'm working on this. It's based on some other cartoon characters of mine. It's all part of my cartoon universe. In fact, some of the characters from Leonard and Larry show up here. And, you know, it's almost finished. I'm working on the last chapter. And it's the next book project. And we may be doing this all over again for a year from now. I don't know.
There you go.
I don't know.
Well, so what is your relationship with your characters? I ask that because so many of the fiction writers I talk with seem to have a unique relationship with their own characters.
I don't know what kind of how I could answer.
You see, some people say that, you know, like fiction writers will say, well, they're kind of like my family, or they're kind of like my kids, or they're like they have descriptions like that, which as a nonfiction writer, I'm never quite sure how that goes. So I'm just wondering if it's that way for a comic strip person as well, or something. Or no.
I don't know. I'm thinking of an interview that Terry Gross did with a major film star, and I'm bad with names. I am not remembering names today. Major film star who lived in Texas. He has his own cattle ranch, and Terry Gross was going, so what is your relationship to your cattle? And this guy was going, what? You're going to ask me what kind of relationship I have with my cattle? You know, I raise them, I sell them, people eat them, you know, or whatever. But Leonard and Larry, you know, they're just they're sort of part of my life, I guess, in a way. They're sort of extensions of my personality. They're I don't really think of them as my children or anything like that. What's interesting is how my readers think of them. It's really remarkable how when I used to get fan mail, but not so much anymore. Maybe I'll start getting it again. But when I used to talk to readers and read their letters and stuff like that, they actually started thinking of Leonard and Larry as almost like real people. Sort of that thing that they talk about in the movies or stage production, you know, a suspension of disbelief that this is no longer just pen and ink on paper, that somehow these are real people living real lives, and your readers get to care about them and care about what happens to them and care about what I do to them in my stories. And that's probably the coolest thing of all, not what kind of relationship I have, but what kind of a relationship that my readers have with my characters.
Well, did that ever, have you ever done something with one of the characters that maybe upset a reader or followers?
Oh, Yes. Yes. There was a time. I had this Larry's employee at his leather shop, a guy named Jim. Jim fell in love with somebody named Merle, who was from Texas, and he was sort of a B-movie actor. And he, with help from Leonard's brother, the producer and writer, who got Merle a job on his sitcom, Merle became a sudden success. And so there was all these issues of Hollywood that Merle would have to deal with. And one of them was that he had a personal assistant. And this personal assistant had a thing for Jim. Jim had suspected that this woman was trying to, as he put it, get into Merle's pants, but that's my territory. And what he finds out is that she's really after him because Merle had been in heterosexual relationships previously, and he wouldn't have been a conquest. Jim would be a conquest because Jim had never been in a heterosexual relationship. He was a virgin, and it was a challenge for her. Her name was Vicky, the personal assistant. And Jim, when he was confronted with this, said, okay, I'm willing to try something. I'm willing to, try something that I've never tried before. Sure, how about next Friday? And readers got really upset. Jim would never do that. Why do you. And of course, you have to read the book. I am not going to spoil it. It is one of the funniest things that I've ever written. What Jim ended up setting a trap for Vicky and what happened to Vicky in the strip after that. And then readers were writing in going, oh, meow, that was nasty. Oh, that was good. Yeah, but it upset them, but they had to wait until the next strip to find out where I was going with it and find out, no, Jim was not going to cheat on Merle. Jim was not going to, go to the dark side. Everything's fine, and my cartoon world continues.
Do you ever cover the topic of sexuality in the comic?
How so?
I guess in a way of how two men live together and kind of their ways sexually as well, or did you stay away from that?
Well, I always thought that the best way to deal with humor is to leave the gag up to the reader's imagination. You talk about it, you set it up, and then you leave it to the reader's imagination because it's much funnier in their imagination than if you would have shown the pratfall. And as far as sex went, I talked about it around the edges, but the readers filled in the rest in their imaginations, and it was sexier and more exciting to them because I didn't show anything. They just imagined it. And I would hear from readers about all kinds of things that they imagined this character doing and that character getting into, and I never really talked about it. It was all in their heads. And I think it works better when when you do it that way.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's great. That's great. Now, are you set up and have a website and a place that you'd like people to come find you? Or are you on all the social media, or are you kind of
no?
You're just you're hiding.
I don't even have a computer. I am talking to you on my smartphone, and that's about as high tech as I get. People can go. I do not do social media. I do not have a website. Nothing like that, and I am happy that I don't. Just if you want to find anything about me and my book and my cartoons, you go to my publisher's website. Everything's there.
Right. Okay. We'll have that up on our website as well,
Very
so people
good.
can find you. And at least you weren't talking to us on your dial. Right?
No.
I mean,
I've had other iterations of technology since then. At least I had a flip phone before this, but no. I haven't had a landline in years. So.
Well, so you're not that far back.
No.
Come on.
No.
No, but wow. So how was everything for you during the pandemic? Everything gone all right, or is it kind of a struggle, or what do you think?
No, I've been retired for quite some time. The pandemic sort of delayed this project, this Complete Leonard and Larry Collection compilations, whatever you'd like to call it, was delayed by the pandemic. It should have been out probably a year ago, but it things finally came together, and this other thing that's sitting in front of me that I'm working on, that started during the pandemic, just as a sort of twiddling my thumbs, can't get out of the house. Let me try to revisit other cartoon characters and see what comes up. And that's a strip that I did for Bear magazine back in the late 80s. I did just one strip called Grizzly N Ted. And the readers of Bear magazine remembered that. Years later, I was always hearing about how people wondered about those characters and wondered about, when I might do something. And I thought, this was in the back of my head, and I started playing around with it. And, I started doing that during the pandemic. Unfortunately, I have carpal tunnel syndrome, and drawing was always an issue, having pain and whatnot. But I thought that I haven't had problems since Leonard and Larry was canceled. But I started trying to draw Grizzly and Ted again, and gosh, the carpal tunnel came roaring back, and it was really bad. So I had to stop doing that. But the first 8 pages of those efforts of revisiting Grizzly and Ted are in the new book. And so people can see what I'm talking about if they look at the book, look in the introduction. First 8 pages of Grizzly and Ted are there.
I guess you couldn't really get someone else to do the drawing for you, could you?
Oh, the big cartoonists do that. Well, they usually do their own drawing, but they have somebody else ink it for them. And as far as the comic books go, it's really stratified. Somebody writes them, somebody pencils in the captions, somebody else inks just captions, somebody else draws the drawings, and somebody else entirely inks the drawings. I'm not like that. I always did everything, I don't think I'd trust somebody else to draw my cartoon characters for me anyway. That would have to be a really special relationship, a relationship that I don't have with any other artist, at least not right now.
Well, maybe one day someone will hear you.
I don't know.
They'll call you. You never know.
We'll see.
You never know. Well, it's certainly been a pleasure. Now, we're talking about the book coming out called The Complete Leonard and Larry Collection, and the creator of these strips, of course, behind the book, has been our guest, and that's Tim Barela. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Tim.
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
The mission has been completed.
The end! By George, he's got it! It is the end! I'll see you.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.